The AOV on quick commerce today is higher than Myntra. Grocery is actually a much bigger pie of the overall retail spend in India. So overall retail spend is 850 billion, 2/3 of that is grocery. So if you don't solve for grocery, you actually have a fairly small TAM. अगर तू किराने स्टोर पे जाएगा और देखो 4 आइटम खरीदने, कितना समय लगेगा? 10 मिनट, 15 मिनट? That is the time that you're giving. अगर तू शॉपिंग मॉल में जाओगे और तुमको 4 ड्रेस खरीदनी है और तुम्हें ट्राई करना है, कितना समय लगेगा? 1 घंटा? मोटा मोटा वही एम्यूलेट हो रहा है. Trying buy is the most prevalent reason for why people order from quick commerce. The return rate on average in the industry is 9%. Today the average delivery time is broadly 45 minutes, but with densification it will come down to 30 minutes. And in India, even though quick commerce is only 3 years old, it's already inching close to $300 a year. The question is not whether quick commerce will become 20% of e-commerce. The question is whether quick commerce will become 20% of retail. That is the $1 billion question.
If there was ever a VC pitch for all listeners to this podcast to get off their ass and say, boss, QuickComm में कुछ बनाते हैं करके $300 billion का वैल्यू कैप्चर करते, this was it. Hey everyone, welcome to episode 30 of Asymmetric Podcast. A lot of you have asked us questions around quick commerce and the economics, and we thought, why not get an expert on it? Please welcome Rahul Garg, partner at General Catalyst. They are backers in a couple of quick commerce companies. General Catalyst is one of the largest venture capital firms in the world. And why not hear from the boss's mouth? So we're going to unpack a lot of things from quick commerce, vertical quick commerce, quick services. A few of you have already started using maid services in 30 minutes. So a lot of excitement happening around this 10-minute, 30-minute, 2-hour thing. B2C brands now trying to do 2-hour deliveries. What's happening to this sector? Why does quick commerce work in India and not anywhere else in the world? That and a lot more in today's episode. Please welcome Rahul. I think the Walmart leadership, which sort of, I think 5-6 days back put out the Walmart International CEO, right? When I don't think देख बाकी लोग कुछ भी बोल दे when Walmart International CEO says कि यार इंडिया में e-commerce का 20% quick com हो गया है. I think that's when people were a little surprised and taken aback कि यार इतना जल्दी 20% कैसे पहुंच गया. I don't think anybody had put a very exact number like this before out publicly. And clearly if the Walmart International CEO is saying that, मतलब it also signals as to how serious they would be about quick com and how have we gone, like, you know, in the last 3 years from quick commerce as a market won't exist to suddenly becoming 20%. And clearly at the growth rate, it seems like it will end up being like 30-40% in the next, anywhere between 3 to 5 years, right? Something drastically has changed, or it was always there and we just didn't notice it. Because no industry, as I said on the chat, right? No industry has ever got disrupted so fast ever. I mean, I'm sure people will talk about AI after 10 years in a similar way, but at least from a tangible outcome perspective, because commerce is what all of us can touch and feel, right? In that sense, itna fast disruption to kabhi nahi hua hai. What has changed, or was it always there? We were just oblivious.
Yeah. So look, in my mind, it's actually not a disruption; it's an evolution, right? This is essentially e-commerce 4.0. So if we go back 15 years, and the reason why e-commerce has picked up in India, because this country has never had deep modern trade here, right? I mean, most of the country across sectors, where we look at grocery, you know, discretionary categories, retail, fashion, any of those categories, most of those categories were largely unorganized. We don't have big box retailers, you know, we don't have, you know, large, brands that are out there. And therefore, in a way, you know, 15 years ago, when e-commerce started in this country, we sort of leapfrogged from unorganized to online directly. And we sort of skipped modern trade in between, right? E-commerce 1.0 was horizontal. That was largely focused on discovery and convenience. 2.0 was vertical and private labels. That was largely focused on category expansion and giving people purpose-built experience, you know, for shopping across categories which required, you know, specific buying behavior. E-commerce 3.0 was actually social commerce, which aimed at solving the problem of LTV to CAC and which aimed at increasing the addressable market, because e-commerce has largely been, you know, top 20 million households, top 30 million household phenomena. So how do you actually go to India 1, India 2, right? That is what social commerce tried to do. And then 4.0 is quick commerce. Quick commerce, essentially what it is tried to do, in my opinion, is it is basically tried to build a business model which emulates offline shopping behavior of a customer. And we can discuss category by category. But if you actually, let's start with grocery, you know, which became the biggest wedge in terms of where quick commerce started from. And actually, before I even go to grocery, there's one point that I want to say. This thing about 3 years ago, people were saying we don't need this. And now all of a sudden people are realizing that, oh, this is probably the next big thing. This is always what happens whenever industry inflects in terms of the innovation. I mean, Henry Ford once very famously said, if I'd asked people what is it that they want, they would have said faster horses. And I gave them a car, basically. So people don't realize that they need it until and unless they have it, basically, right? Some founder somewhere will have to imagine the experience and will have to imagine how I can transform the industry. And then the consumers will realize, okay, this is what makes sense, Coming back to the grocery point, if you look at why grocery became a great wedge for quick commerce, and grocery was largely unsolved by online. I mean, even with Big Basket, Grofers, to some extent Dunzo, grocery was still 2%. Online grocery was still 2% of the overall market. And grocery is actually a much bigger pie of the overall retail spend in India. So overall retail spend is 850 billion, 2/3 of that is grocery. So if you don't solve for grocery, you actually have a fairly small TAM. The way grocery shopping happens in India, let's say compared to the West, compared to what people at Walmart would have seen in their home country, Indians, typically buy small ticket, high frequency purchases. That's what they do. The average, ticket size of purchasing in India would be, 100 to 200 rupees when they go and buy from a kirana store, versus if you go to US, it's 3 to 6,000 rupees, anywhere between $30-$35 to, let's say, $60-$65. So we are a very small ticket size, economy in that ways. The number of SKUs that an Indian kitchen has is far more than the number of SKUs that the West has. The storage space that an average Indian kitchen has is far less than what you have in the US. And therefore, there is a certain buying behavior. In fact, I want to show you guys this chart. Let me just project something.
Is it fair to say that in the e-commerce 1, 2, and 3 wave, grocery never got disrupted? And that was what the 4th wave is solving for in the biggest way?
Yes, correct. So in the first 3 waves, grocery never got disrupted because the first 3 business models did not have a very strong format market fit to grocery, or it did not have a very strong format market fit to high frequency, low AOV categories. Right. And I think when we go through different categories over the course of this discussion, we'll realize why quick commerce unlocks additional capabilities for a particular, category to just completely enhance or reimagine the customer experience. So basically what this shows basically that India's grocery market has been extremely unorganized. Online penetration is extremely low compared to every other country that's out there, right? Look at the buying frequency of consumers across category, right? So 2 things that I wanted to highlight. Basically, there is the buying frequency across categories extremely high. So how do you build a business model, which is hyper local in a way that you don't have, significant delivery costs, and you can sort of provide the same experience, offline experience that a user has of going to a kirana store 2 or 3 times a week and then purchasing from there, right? And second, if you look at it, unlike the West, right, India has tremendous amount of population density. Some of the top cities in India, the population density is almost 22 to 25,000 people per kilometer. Whereas if you go to top cities in US, it will be 3 to 6,000, people per kilometer. And therefore, in India, there is usually a very high demand for grocery, even in small catchment areas. And that is why kiranas have been so successful. So if you look at this chart on the right side, India actually has the highest number of grocery outlets per 1,000 households. We have almost 43. The only thing, that's more than us is Indonesia. China is, almost 1/3, 1/4 of us. And then everything else is very, very small.
The frequency of buying for dairy, meat, and fruits and vegetables is very high. And therefore, there had to be a store very close to the customer.
So A is from customer need perspective, and B also, the business needs to make sense. There has to be enough demand in that small catchment area of 1 or 2 kilometers for the small mom and pop or a kirana store to thrive, basically. So India's population density in terms of, number of people who are living per square kilometer is just far, far higher than what we see in some of the other countries, right? And that creates this beautiful microcosm where there is a need and a buying behavior of having, a kirana store in proximity because I need to go there and buy, at least 2-3 times. And then there is enough demand in small catchment area that these kirana stores can actually thrive as business units, So that's what I'm trying to say. So what I'm trying to establish is, I think one of the points that was there earlier. So 2 things. People said why quick commerce works in India, doesn't work anywhere else, and why do we need quick commerce? So I think what I'm trying to establish is why quick commerce works in India, right? I mean, because India is uniquely built for quick commerce. Quick commerce has a very strong, again, format market fit for India, both in terms of how customers buy stuff and how the structure of the country allows for a thriving business model, in this ways, right? Um, so I would say this is the reason why I think quick commerce as a format, fits grocery. Now, what quick commerce offers is it offers you the best of the Kirana world, basically, where you can just step down, buy something in 10 minutes. But it also offers you, it sort of marries that with the best of a modern trade in terms of the assortment, in terms of the pricing, in terms of, so a typical Kirana store will keep 1 or 2 thousand SKUs. And those SKUs will differ widely depending on which part of the Bangalore or which part of the Bombay, which city, etc., etc. Whereas a quick commerce store on the grocery side today keeps almost 10,000 SKUs. I mean, there are a lot of non-grocery items as well. I mean, it can go to 30, 40,000 SKUs. So imagine, if you're living in a tier 2 city like Agra or Aligarh or wherever, and you were going to your normal grocery store where you had only limited number of biscuits available, limited kinds of chocolates available, limited kinds of other confectionery items available, and now all of a sudden you get this 10,000 SKU assortment. It's a massively elevated experience for the consumer with the same buying behavior. He can still buy his order can still be 100, 200 rupees. He will still get it in 15 minutes. He doesn't necessarily need to change his buying behavior, but the quality of purchase increases significantly. So therefore, I think it's an evolution. It's not necessarily a disruption.
Right, and social commerce, there were the PDD equivalent that we built, right? Or we tried, where fruits and vegetables or staples was a part of, I think, what Dealshare tried to do. But the economics didn't work out from what I.
Or I think before we move on to figuring out how, like, you're right, in terms of consumer wanting something in 10, 15 minutes, 43 is actually sounds very high for every 1,000 households. But now that you think about every small neighborhood and catchment area, like even a society will have a captive Kirana store with like fresh supply of fruits and vegetables, and dairy to hota hi hai wahan pe roj,
And
kind of
think
in terms
about
of
tier
demand.
2 cities. For example, if you go to Agra or those bazaar, every fifth shop is a Kirana store, or a sixth shop could be a Kirana store, right? So there's very high
Yeah.
concentration of some of those shops.
Yeah, but I think, and you're very close to the economics, and we can discuss that. But I wanted to come back to what you were talking about, big box retail not finding its moment in India, and this is where, at least from a Bombay shaving company standpoint, also there is some access to how some of these big box retail in India has been thinking for the last few years, right? In 2011, 2012, you talk to anyone at a Unilever, Colgate, Procter, Reckitt, everyone was thumping the table and saying, boss, the modern trade revolution is now here, right? The quality of experience in terms of discovery of brands, SKUs, the number of bills and the quantity per bill was kind of doing very well. And we thought the moment was here. But after a certain point, it just sputtered to a stagnancy way before the potential was realized. And we kept thinking, and then the e-commerce came, we felt that, the modern trade revolution will not happen, the way it will happen in other countries. But now I think there is a lot of chatter and potential belief in big box retail again in India, that we don't know whether it will happen, but there is now an ironical view that what if quick is the consumer behavior that you actually needed for big box retail to work? And now, hence, you're seeing Reliance, DMart, more, Vijay sales to Korea, but sorry, Vishal Mega Mart. Everyone is now using their retail footprint as now a delivery hub and spoke model, which suddenly expands the scope completely. And my view is consumers are extremely flirty, right? They will, if they want a cart of 10 items, they will see where the first three or four. Actually, we are now seeing consumers are looking, they now have a sense that अगर मेरे को ये 8 चीजें चाहिए, which is the one which is least likely to be found in they start with that. If that is available, then they start populating the cart like kind of backwards first. And then moment the cart has 4 or 5 items, then the purchase becomes almost like a 50% sticky purchase, right? So if there is assortment richness in a modern trade, which is far higher than, let's say, a 3,000 square foot dark store, for example, plus there is distribution footprint, plus there is possibly some kind of buying scale super advantage. Is it now modern trades and big box retail's moment in India where the consumer now kind of has a differentiated access?
Yeah, no, that's a very fair point. Yes and no, to be honest, right? I mean, I think if you look at it, 90% of the market is still unorganized. Now, this 90% will eventually become 40, 50% as India sort of goes from emerging economy to a developed economy, basically, right? A large part of, so some part of that is going to get captured by quick commerce players. Some part of that is going to get captured by big box retailers, the likes of, Reliance, DMart, etc. We need to understand why. I mean, before we actually even discuss whether the moment has arrived or not, we need to understand maybe, why these big box retailers work or don't work in India. See, one of the big requirements that somebody like a DMart or a Reliance has is a basket size or is an AOV. DMart cannot work with an AOV of 300 rupees or 400 rupees. The economics doesn't allow that. If you look at DMart's gross margins, that's 12%, right? And then if you look at the drop from gross margin to its EBITDA, it's only about 3-4%. That can happen because it has high average order value. If you reduce the average order value even by 50%, the economics will just not work, for DMart. And therefore, for modern trade to become the most ubiquitous model for, let's say, top 50 or top 100 cities in India, the buying power of the country and the consumers will have to go up. It is.
No, but what if that is the assumption that you're sweating the entire real estate for that AOV. My view is what they're doing is they're taking 5-10% of real estate and basically making that a dark store. So any inventory kind of gets divided very quickly. So any inventory, if they're buying from, let's say, a brand, they'll say 90% is or 80% is these SKUs which sit in the front of the store or on my shelf. These SKUs actually, Reliance has 3,000 stores in India, right? And 10% of those 3,000 stores then start becoming high churn, low AOV kind of stuff where they're able to fulfill the non-first week billings for that catchment area. कि तुम पहले 10 दिन दुकान में आ रहे हो, तुम पूरे महीने का सामान ले रहे हो, तो ये तुम्हारा 5,000 का, ये तुम्हारे 9 रुपए का तुम्हारा sugar, oil, all of that you do. By the way, here is a 10% discount for when you are at home and you have the GeoMart app and you want it in 15 minutes. By the way, here it is.
Yeah.
And you then the funnel becomes completely leak proof as long as the cart is 90% fillable.
Yeah.
And
No, you're absolutely right.
The AOV math doesn't work. No? Then it becomes very different.
You are absolutely right. I mean, if they're able to execute on this, theoretically, there is no reason why, they should not be able to capture the demand. The only bottleneck here that I would say is, today grocery is moving to a place where the catchment areas of dark stores are shrinking, because people are, the density of the demand is increasing, the number of order volumes is increasing, the number of SKUs are increasing. So today, on average, if you take Blinkit, Zepto and Instamart, the average catchment area for their delivery in high density areas is less than 2 kilometers, actually, right? So it's almost like 1.7, 1.8 kilometers, right?
But I have a question. Sorry, hold your thought. I have a question there, and maybe you can continue your thought. But my question is, I think there is an understanding across all quick commerce that sensitivity to time of delivery is very high. कि 11 minute और 12 minute versus 8 minute में customer switch कर लेता है. My fundamental belief is that is not true. I don't believe that is true. Because I beat so many friends. I look at the number of hand-picked orders that come in my society, for example, is upwards of 130. So people are very comfortable with the mail basket type of ordering service also. So when you feel like when you overestimate sensitivity of time of delivery is when you assume that a dark store cannot work at a certain density or like 1.5 kilometers. But
maybe it's not 8 and 11, Shantanu, but maybe the difference is 10 and 45. Like food delivery, if you see what Rohit Kapoor is saying, कि by doing Bolt in 10 minutes against the usual 45-minute food delivery, we are able to increase the frequency of ordering and we are able to pull market share. So 10 minutes and 45 minutes में तो gap होगा ना. So what is that threshold?
Hunger is a very different, but RB, hunger is a very different trigger. That I get. There I can kind of get it.
I think Rahul would have done research considering how much capital people are deploying in Q-Comm. My view is there would be research done on this. That's your view, Shantanu. I don't disagree with your view. I don't agree with it also, but I'm saying if someone's done the research, I would love to know the number. What is that threshold at which you believe that? Because ये होता है शांतनु यार, why would Uber go after and say I want so much supply that 5 minutes के अंदर cab मिलनी चाहिए? Because supply is the only thing that, and in quick commerce I could argue it is not having stocked out. Like if you want a certain brand and it's not there on one, you may go on the other. So that is the cab equivalency. But I think the timing may also matter at some point of time. I don't know. Is there research around this, Rahul?
Yeah. So look, there is retention cohorts that most of the investors who have evaluated quick commerce have seen with most of the companies that are out there. I think the whole 15-minute point about, I can't discuss exact numbers, but the whole 15-minute point that came about saying that we need to deliver in less than 15 minutes and closer to 10 minutes, that was because there is a massive drop in retention once it crosses that particular number. I can't say the number because it's a private number of a private company basically, right? But there is clear data to sort of suggest that. But Shantanu, I'll also address your point by looking at it from 2 or 3 angles, right? If there are 2 retailers who offer the same assortment and who offer similar pricing, basically, right? Let's assume that the pricing difference is not 10, 15, 20%, right? The pricing difference is maybe 2-3% here and there across items. then consumers will definitely, and one person is providing it to you in 10 minutes, the other person is taking 60 minutes. There is absolutely no reason, for the other, for the consumer to buy it from the other platform, right? And the difference between having a 2-kilometer catchment area and a 10-kilometer catchment area is precisely that. It goes from, 7-8 minutes to a 60-minute, right? So that's point number one. Point number two is, and I'm saying this from a pure play quick commerce business perspective on a standalone basis. I mean, Reliance, for example, let's take Reliance have their storefront and Reliance have their dark store. And, the storefront is subsidizing the dark store business. That's a very different thing. But if you look at the dark store business itself, if you're actually delivering a grocery order in an hour, then your delivery cost will eat into your margins, right? It will not be, you need to have a certain concentration of number of orders per hour per delivery boy for the delivery cost to actually make sense and be beneficial to the platform, right? So even from a business standpoint, it doesn't make sense for you to fulfill an order that is 10 kilometers out. It's actually the wrong business decision. Then you're neither here, you're not there, basically, right? So that's the second point. And then it's very hard to understand why, there is a sort of an inflection point in terms of delivery time with the consumer buying behavior, but there is a cutoff. There is a big fall that happens, let's say, after 14, 15 minutes.
By the way, on the 1 hour thing, I think what people are doing is they're doing a milk run, Rahul. So I agree with your point on single deliveries, but I think like what we are seeing in the the vertical commerce space where there's a Myntra in 1 hour and there is a
So vertical is a
first
slightly
crime.
different. Correct.
I think the AOVs are maybe a little different, or maybe they're doing milk run. What we are seeing with D2C, like we are now, Little Joys, our kids' health brand, is already at 10% of our orders is now getting delivered in 2 hours, right?
Yeah.
But
Revant, तू ऐसे
my
सोच के
economics,
अगर तू किराने स्टोर पे जाएगा और देखो 4 आइटम खरीदने, कितना समय लगेगा? 10 मिनट, 15 मिनट? That is the time that you're giving. अगर तू शॉपिंग मॉल में जाओगे और तुमको 4 ड्रेस खरीदनी है और तुम्हें ट्राई करना है, कितना समय लगेगा? 1 घंटा? मोटा मोटा वही एम्यूलेट हो रहा है.
Very interesting. Good analogy, actually.
If you actually look at this chart, this basically tells you that India may already, people are saying that the food margins are going to be better than the global counterparts, right? So the blue bars on the left-hand side, the blue bars are basically EBITDA margins for 2023, which are actuals. And then, the gray bar is the food margins expected on food delivery platforms in 2026, right? So you can see Zomato is probably going to be the highest compared to everybody else. And then the philosophy is that in quick commerce, quick commerce margins should be higher than the food margins in India. So A, margins for India platforms higher than rest of the world, and B, quick commerce margins higher than food. The reason for this is, if you actually look at this chart.
This is outstanding, huh? India garib desh hai, margin nahi deta hai, is all disproven. It's just one chart. It's crazy.
Correct. If you look at this chart, India has the highest AOV per GDP per capita compared to every other country. I don't know if you guys can see this chart.
People have always shown low AOV hai hum in absolute terms, but if you are indexing it to GDP per capita, 3 of India is dragging down most of the GDP per capita. Okay, and Zomato is now tier 1, tier 2, and Blinkit is only in tier 1. So shouldn't we compare? And I'm sure US maybe aisa hoga, right? DoorDash is not in like the tier 2 of US or tier 3 of US, right? Sorry, I'm being a little pricky, but I think it's a lovely chart. I'm assuming directionally we take the view, but maybe the more accurate thing to do would be to have a
100%.
But
100%. But
still surprising.
The reason why the reason why first chart is important, because when you actually combine the first chart with the second chart, so AOV, per GDP per capita is highest by order of magnitude, and then the percentage of delivery cost as AOV is lowest compared to every other platform, and then it's even lower in quick commerce.
It's outstanding. Huh? So low wage cost / there is a supply efficiency in terms of wage cost, and from whatever markets they are serving, let's assume that it will be an India 1 or India 2 phenomenon only. But that's what the businesses are doing smartly. Okay, let me serve the high income customer or the nuanced customer who's okay to pay for this, and fund that with employment generation for people for whom this is good employment and good money.
Revant, remember, I think one way to look at this is and I'll then, put this in the context of quick commerce. The way to look at this is, basis the purchase power of the country is willing to pay in terms of the basket size, therefore AOV is higher, GDP per capita, and the country is able to service that order cheaper than everybody else, in the market globally, and therefore quick commerce works in India. We are still talking about quick commerce where average order value is still 400, 500 rupees.
Yeah.
This is not actually a high AOV business, right? So when the AOV of quick commerce starts to reach closer to e-commerce, this left-hand chart will...
it will balloon up massively.
3x, right?
Yeah, no,
Interesting.
phenomenal. I think this is like a very eye-opening chart. Yeah, just a comparison to the fact that everyone always said that China mein log people pay, US mein people pay, and therefore economics for marketplaces are better. But you just dispelled all of that in just one chart, saying that by kya margin, matlab, just the EBITDA margin. I mean, one could argue that ठीक है, based on purchasing power, etc. But just the fact that the EBITDA margin is the ultimate ये, right? कि भाई अगर free cash flow आ रहा है और EBITDA तुम ज्यादा बना रहे हो, तो clearly your economics are on par, if not, and as you are already showing, better than what global players are doing. Then the only question is how large can this be? That's the only question one should be asking
Yeah,
for. Outstanding,
correct,
yeah.
correct. So this chart I thought was very meaningful. In fact, I was looking at the data and I was very surprised to see that in quick commerce, the average spend for a user per year is roughly $250. And in India, even though quick commerce is only 3 years old, it's already inching close to $300 a year.
Wow. LTV is also
So
like,
two cities are 2 or 3, right? And you know, they are 5x bigger than us in terms of GDP per capita.
wow. Again, outstanding. Just like, we've always, like, Amazon globally makes, I think, 6% EBITDA and it's still loss making in India. So I think पिछले 15 साल का बैगेज बहुत है अपने पे कि जो मॉडल बाहर चले हैं उससे वर्स ही होंगे इकोनॉमिक्स इंडिया में बिकॉज देश गरीब है इंफ्रा नहीं है बट व्हाट यू आर सेइंग इज इट वाज वी जस्ट डिडंट हैव we didn't Indianize the need. We just copied it before actually thinking what is unique to India. And quick commerce, what it's doing is actually just solving what is the unique Indian cultural nuance and need. And hence we are actually then able to get even better economics than what the similar model would in the other countries.
Yeah. And last 15 years, we were evolving, right? We were educating customers, we were solving for trust deficit, we were building logistics infra, we were getting more brands. So there was a lot of capital that has actually gone into creating the market or taking the market to a certain level where now a very India-specific playbook can come and actually create a healthy business model. At least thesis-wise, it makes sense.
No, you just made me realize how wrong I was in a direction. Like I've been seeing a lot of these models and I keep debating with a lot of VCs ki yaar economics kaise baithenge and etc. But I think we because we are in it, and this is one of a very senior VC had told me ki yaar, even whenever you are inside the market na, your ability to go out of it, it's like you can't go out of Earth. Only when you go to space will you see Earth kitna beautiful hai karke. Like
Correct,
वो perspective लाना बहुत मुश्किल हो जाता है when you are operating within the market, right? And changes, you will not notice changes happening on the ground because you have your blinders on and that's where most people will miss a Zepto, for example, right?
So I actually honestly believe that quick commerce margin will be better than food and maybe worse than DMart. So that is where your floor and ceiling is. And if you are able to produce a 5% EBITDA margin on a very large base, it's a phenomenal business.
Amazon is 600 billion with 6% EBITDA. Yeah. Look at how valuable the company is.
In fact, I'll show you one more chart actually now that we are, I'll just take a little bit more time.
Our consumers love charts, by the way.
सारे चार्ट दिखाओ यार, सारे चार्ट दिखाओ यार.
So
आप रुक क्यों रहे हो?
See, if you look at this, DMart today is the most efficient business when it comes to P&L, right?
Okay.
But DMart has a massive ROE drag because it's a business that is built on acquiring physical assets, land, and then building on top, basically. So here in the table below, if you look at it, DMart at its peak performance, which is producing almost 8% of EBITDA margin, it still produces only 17% of ROE. On the quick commerce side, in steady state, if you're producing 5% of EBIT margin, not even EBITDA, EBIT margin, right, 4% of net profit, and then you have zero leverage into the business, you still be a 38% ROE company.
Wow.
Which basically means that you should actually be valued a lot more than DMart.
Yeah. That's another good perspective. But DMart is the only one who's acquiring land assets and therefore has this drag. Na? Baki retailers ko kahan hoga? Let's say Reliance Retail would not be acquiring its own assets. Uska EBIT margin agar 5% hoga to uska ROE kya niklega? It will be a little better.
I don't know Reliance Retail's
Actually,
numbers
private
but even when you private hai, but even if you adjust, for example, ऊपर वाले chart में ना, you can see the ROE without land and with land. अगर तू without भी कर दे तब भी it is 25% only.
So it's a good business even without land. ROE 25% is a great business, but you're saying 25 के अगर मेरे को अगर 40% मिल रहा है तो
Correct. So you were talking about 20%. Yeah, quick commerce, to your original point where you started, right? Quick commerce is already 20% of e-commerce. E-commerce is broadly $65-70 billion. Quick commerce, give or take, is roughly $12 billion. So we are already at 20%. The question is not whether quick commerce will become 20% of e-commerce. The question is whether quick commerce will become 20% of retail.
Yeah,
That is the $1 billion question, right? So people are saying that, by in the next 5 or 6 years or the next 4 or 5 years, we are going to go from 60 billion in e-commerce to roughly 200 billion in e-commerce against a retail market of $1 trillion. If 100 or 120 billion of that is quick commerce, then you are going to produce $300 billion of additional value in the market.
Yeah. And that
Because
300
every
billion
$1
कौन
billion
capture करेगा?
$3 of value.
Wow. If there was
It's not
ever
a
a
billion
VC
dollar
pitch,
question, Rahul. It's a $300 billion question.
Yeah,
Shantanu,
exactly.
if there was ever a VC pitch for all listeners to this podcast to get off their ass and say, boss, QuickCom में कुछ बनाते हैं करके $300 billion का value capture करते, this was it. Like just
Crazy.
phenomenal clarity, right? कि if
Yeah.
you're going to generate $100 billion of additional QuickCom GMV, where is that going to come from? And who are the folks who are going to build it out and what are the models that will succeed? Is just a great macro question to ask.
But यही तो है ना यार रेवंत, आप देखो अगर लास्ट 50-60 साल में यही तो है. There's a technology leads to some consumption leads to revenue pools lead to profit pools lead to value creation. That cycle has happened. That's getting a lot more crunch. We saw it happen with, let's say, telecom with Jio and Airtel over the last 10 years, despite headwinds of regulatory and governmental forces and so on. Right? इसमें तो मतलब there is nothing. There is really retail is $1 trillion now, is it? Rahul?
Retail is 850 now.
Will become.
It's expected trillion in 4-5 years. Yeah.
फिर तो है ना यार ये. फिर तो है ना clear कर. Yeah, again, my view is that margins will find a way to adapt to this.
Yeah. No, but I
Margins
also
find a way to adapt to
like this perspective from Rahul because now I also get when I meet some senior folks who are super excited about the country now, and I can now sort of put that into a little bit of context. कि यार 15 साल भी तो आप पहले excited थे. Like you've been a VC for 20 years. You're always excited. And it's like, no, yeah, this is different. And I can sort of now see why the numbers actually make sense, right? कि यार $1 trillion retail होगा, but अब जो अगला 200 बिलियन आएगा वो बहुत ही अलग होगा और वो तुम लोग बनाओगे. वो ट्रेडिशनल रिटेल नहीं सोच ही नहीं पाता ऐसे, right? Like there's a palpable shift in how the next 5 to 10 years seem to be like, yeah, this is the time to build in India if there was anyone.
I have a little bit of I think we have discussed this, the proximity convenience lever being pulled here to the extreme. How about, when we think about this grocery segment, a big portion of that is fruits and vegetables, right? And at least when I speak to consumers, a question of quality comes in. While these guys are delivering in 10 odd minutes, but the quality is like very, very variable from the same player also. And how difficult it is, from a unit economic point of view, and also from building that supply chain point of view also. That how difficult it is. I know that people in food delivery, when they're doing the 10-minute delivery, they're standardizing all of that samosas and coffees in a very different way. But how do you can't standardize a banana or a vegetables. How difficult is that considering that's a significant portion of that grocery item?
It is as difficult as it's as much difficult, so the level of difficulty depends on how much quality control or the end experience you want to control. So, for example, if you're okay with having variability in terms of quality, pricing, etc., then you will go and source from a local mandi, right? If not a wholesaler, you will go and source from a local mandi in the morning, and then let's say bananas, for example, whatever the ripening level of that bananas is, whether it's someday it's good to consume in a day, someday it's good to consume in 3 days, someday you can't consume it in 3 days because it's too raw, basically, right? That is how it was built, in the early days. But what people have come to realize that why fruits and vegetable is a low ASP item, it's a very important category because it creates quality and reliability perception of the platform. It's one of those.
Exactly. I think that's the big hook.
Correct.
That's the big hook, which I have seen at least in my house also, and when we have spoken to the consumers, that fruits and vegetables solve kara do. I think that's what you need possibly daily. You want to order fresh. I think milk has been solved by Milk Basket and Country Delight mostly. But how do you solve for this? I think, and we are seeing some new startups come up in quick commerce who are only solving for fruits and vegetables, saying that we are going to deliver premium. Is that a wedge still available?
So I'll tell you. So in my mind, at least, the only way to solve this, and companies are solving this, at least the top 3 players are looking to solve this. The only way to solve this is significant amount of vertical integration. You need to actually own the supply chain to the extent of having almost captive capacity with farmers, right? So, in food, you either procure from a local mandi. If you're procuring, you either procure from a local mandi, or you procure from a regional player, or you procure from a national player. So there are certain items that are available at a national, through a national supply chain, some through a regional supply chain, and then some, products which come from a local mandi. I think the items that are available in a local mandi and and at a regional supply chain, you'll need to basically build your own captive capacity where you have visibility of, the supply coming in at certain hours, how you handle that supply, how do you grade those products in terms of quality and in terms of consumption before XYZ. And then some players have gone to a level where they have created these ripening chambers, right? Where you take a product, you put them into a ripening chamber, and you create 3 units. This could be this can be consumed today, this can be consumed in 2 days, this can be consumed in 5 days. It looks complicated. It is not. It's essentially, vertical integration of supply chain, but somebody needs to have an intent and want to do this. Some people are doing it, some are not. To your second question of pure play players, yeah, pure play में होता क्या है कि मुझे ऐसा लगता है कि when you are doing these complicated low AOV, low margin categories, fruits and vegetable actually is a low margin category if you want to sell it at the same price that a thela wala sells. It's a high margin category if you're selling at a price where organic, vegetables or all of those sell, but otherwise it's a low margin category. So if you want to do that, and if you want to do it at an industrial scale where you control the supply chain, etc., it's better done, at a horizontal player where it becomes an additional capture of wallet share rather than me, investing money into acquiring customers, selling only fruits and vegetables, and then, trying to make the P&L work on that. It just becomes very hard, over there.
Interesting. Would that naturally segue into a hypothesis that low margin horizontal categories is where we will be cash cow categories for, let's say, horizontal quick commerce players, and for high margin categories you will start seeing verticalization in like specialized, like what Nykaa did by building out of Amazon, Flipkart for beauty, or Myntra for fashion. We'll start seeing that happen in the quick space also. A lot of the kind of funding dollars are also going now towards specialized quick players, and we're seeing it happen across where, and you're right, these are all high margin places. So more specialized, lower sensitivity to price, maybe a higher AOV, and then the big three then kind of really focus on low margin, but then kind of really to industrial scale by doing ripening chambers for F&B and so on. Is that where this will
Look, I
evolve?
think one way, I won't say that, because, horizontals also sell categories, a lot of categories which are high margins. Wellness is one of those. So there are a lot of, those things. I think, there is a case for vertical quick commerce players where there is a specific buying behavior of a user. So for example, I don't think globally, historically, any horizontal has been able to become a destination for fashion. For every Amazon, there is a Shein. For every Flipkart, there is a Myntra. And I'm sure for every Zepto, Blinkit, etc., there is going to be somebody else, right? Because it's a very differentiated shopping experience. The problem statements are very, very different, right? Similarly, if you look at some of the service-related categories like household services or home services, etc., I think it's a very the fundamentals of those categories are very similar in a way to grocery: high frequency, low AOV, lack of reliability, lack of trust, supply is complicated, etc. But it's not a category that you can easily launch and sort of solve at a horizontal level. Similarly, pharmacies, maybe a few other categories. So I think it's going to probably depend on, whether the category needs a bespoke shopping experience.
To your point on e-commerce 1.0 horizontal and then 2.0 became the vertical players.
Vertical, yeah.
I really like your framework, Rahul, that, low AOV, high frequency is what ideally should get disrupted by quick and e-commerce 5.0. Horizontal players were first. Now there is a lot of horizontal services players are now getting funded, right? Which is dog walkers at home, or maybe starting with maids at home, right? Get a maid in 30 minutes and stuff like that. But if I see the VC interest in a First Cry 2.0, which is First Cry in 2 hours, 2 of them have now got term sheets. I think they'll close the round soon. The Myntra in 1 hour or Myntra in 2 hours have now got funded, and more people are looking at that space. I'm pretty sure someone's going to come up and say there's a Nykaa in 1 hour possible. And I'm pretty sure it'll get funded as well. But I agree with you that not everything needs to happen in 1 or 2 hours. And are we at, again, a little bit of a hype stage for everything in 1 hour versus, things that are really only that I agree with you on the pharmacy bit, for example. Medicines are absolutely something that should be gotten in 1 hour or 30 minutes. Like there was this lot of push when people were anti-Q-Comm saying, "Bhai, ambulance 10 minutes में दे दो यार, grocery क्यों दे रहे हो?" That is more
I
important.
agree.
दवाई in 10 minutes और दवाई in 30 minutes is such a beautiful thing, right? Because it's a local pharmacist. जहाँ पे आप 100, 200, 300, 500 रुपए की दवाई ले रहे हो. And if an आदमी is someone बीमार at home, you would rather have it home, coming
It's
home versus
usually a last minute purchase, यार. मतलब वो last minute
even if it
purchase
is not. I'm just saying from a
Yeah.
pain point of view, even if it's a scheduled purchase. Let's say I'm diabetic, I need to take some medicines every time. Same principle, right? If it is available at the same price to me, and I don't need to go, और घर पे अगर कोई बीमार है ना, if you think about it, then it's the entire family also has more work in that sense, right? So going somewhere, picking it up, and that's why I thought that pharmacy in 30 minutes is a far better, but I'm not seeing. I'm seeing deals like those. I'm not seeing the VC interest in those for some reason, because the supply is hard actually to get a FDA license of wholesale pharmacy and retail pharmacy, and every location. Like I know for a fact that all the 3 top guys in horizontal commerce tried to get a FDA license so that they could have drugs as well, but it's too painful because apart from FSSAI, now you need FDA as well, and the speed at which you get the FSSAI is very different from FDA, and therefore a lot of them are now not stocking drugs. And I don't mean drugs by mean of medicines, but there are enough OTC products that also come under the FDA versus an FSSAI, right? In especially health and wellness. So, what's your view on all of these? Like, if you have a broader view on कि यार baby care होना चाहिए 30 minute में नहीं होना चाहिए, what are the pros cons? How would as an investor you look at these? Would love to hear your view on that.
Yeah, and just to add, Rahul, on the contrary, while he's saying we are not seeing action in pharmacy, we are seeing action in fashion, right? And I go back to what I think you had nicely put, that is there an equivalent offline behavior which we are trying to replicate online? But लेकिन अभी as you said कि in fashion you typically go to a mall, you will spend a few hours. It's not a immediate need product that you're trying to cook something, So in that context, I think unpacking these category level answers, or people are looking at these are wedges that okay, let's enter through fashion and then we are also going to do grocery because that's how it is going to pan out. How is the world evolving there? I think would be good to know.
Yeah, no, it's a fair question. Look, I think, Revant, to your original point of saying that people are saying now 1 hour for everything, that's the nature of our business. That's going to happen. There is going to be a force fit of a successful model in a certain categories across several categories. Some will succeed, some will not succeed, but that's a natural progression of how an innovation works. An innovation could be infra-led, could be tech and product-led, could be a business model-led. This is a business model-led innovation, that's sort of happening, right? So it's only natural to see some of these things. And I think a lot of people, either they were indifferent to quick commerce when it was coming up, or they were naysayers to quick commerce when it was coming up. So now it's almost like PTSD of not wanting to say no again to anybody who comes and says, there is a need for it, right? So it's just the market dynamics. But the framework that at least I use, when I'm looking at quick commerce, it is not enough to simply say that, if baby care products were available in 2 days before, and now if they're available in 1 hour, it's just a better experience for the customer. And therefore it should work. I think that's very incremental thinking, right? I mean, sure, it'll work, but then is it actually changing the experience of consumer 10x, right? In my mind, the categories that are going to work are the ones which are going to reimagine those categories, in quick commerce. And let's take fashion for a minute, right? So fashion has 3 C's. Fashion marketplace usually has 3 C's, right? It has curation, convenience, and cost. Okay. Now, if you look at Myntra today, right? Myntra probably has 500,000 SKUs just in the women's category. There's a massive catalog fatigue, right? You're seeing product after product after product. Curation has gone out of the window, right? I mean, it's a one size fit all platform. It's sort of
everything for everybody. बच्चे भी हैं, men भी हैं, women भी हैं, सब कुछ ही है. हाँ.
Correct. And when you become everything to everybody, you become nothing to nobody in a way, broadly speaking, right? So what quick commerce is trying to do is, quick commerce is a very hyper local business. किस society की किस building के किस apartment से क्या order आ रहा है, and then you try and establish trends कि इस locality में लोग क्या पहनते हैं, क्या demand है, बांद्रा में कैसा चल रहा है, बैंडस्टैंड पे कैसा चल रहा है, थाने में क्या चल रहा है, पवई में क्या चल रहा है. You can actually build very strong hyper local data led intelligence, and you can have a curated platform of saying I'll carry only 8 to 10,000 SKUs per dark store, right? We'll see how players execute on it, but hypothetically, theoretically, hypothesis-wise, it makes a lot of sense, basically, right? And you can have different assortments across different dark stores. I mean, your dark store is servicing 10 kilometers area. So let's say if you are in Mumbai, you probably need 5 or 6 dark stores. You can have 60% common assortment, 40% assortment. That's very hyper local to that specific areas. More importantly, if you're actually carrying only 8 to 10,000 SKUs, you can actually churn your inventory and churn the styles and the trends every 2 months fairly easily. You cannot rotate 500,000 SKUs, but you can rotate 4,000 SKUs, 5,000 SKUs, and that significantly enhances the value proposition for the end customer from a curation standpoint, right? You have essentially bought Zara to every home. You know, the Zara style of fast fashion or Shein
Very
style of
interesting
fast.
point. Like in fast inventory turns is a very big ROCE driver for most fashion companies, and maybe viewers don't see that, but I think it's a very interesting point that fashion में सबसे बड़ी दिक्कत सबकी inventory churn होती है. And what you're saying is I will be able to really do fast fashion. But I need data at that level. So the first 3-4 years will actually be burn to gather that data intelligence. And then my burn will come down because I'll be able to very accurately predict in real time कि भाई मेरे को किस सिटी में किस एरिया में क्या स्टाइल चाहिए, मैं जस्ट इन टाइम बनवाऊंगा फिर वो. तो मेरी इन्वेंट्री चर्न भी बहुत फास्ट होगी.
Correct.
Very interesting.
So that is on the curation side of things, why in the long term, the model may have a very strong fit to reimagine how fashion marketplaces look like. The other most important thing is convenience, right? Imagine this, right? Today, you are sitting at home, evening or afternoon, you've not gone to office, you want to buy some stuff, you're browsing, you see 5 items, you order those 5 items, you're not sure about style, you're not sure about fit, you're not sure about size, but you nonetheless order those 5 items. In half an hour, those items come to you. You try those items, for the next 15 minutes, you keep what you want and you return what you don't want. Try and buy. What has happened? You've essentially bought the trial room to your home. You've bought the assortment of a mall to your home, to the convenience of your home, right? 10 years ago, this company started, which was called Stitch Fix. I think all of you guys must have heard of Stitch Fix. I mean, I actually found it very fascinating when I first looked at it. They were trying to reimagine personalization, and they said, you just let us know what is it that you want. You want a shirt or you want a trouser or whatever, and you let us know your choice. What is it that you like? What is your size, etc. And then we'll send you a blind box with 5 items, and hopefully you will love them and you pick whatever you want. Now, people who wanted to buy one item, the data, and they had huge amount of data. Out of the 5 items, on average, people ended up buying 3.2 times. No, 3.2 things basically, right? What that means is that when, you remove friction in the buying behavior, people end up buying a lot more than, what they would have bought otherwise. I mean, typically when we go to a shopping mall, we want to buy 2 t-shirts, we end up, हम 5 try करते हैं, हमको 3 पसंद आ गए तो हम 3 ले लेते हैं basically, right? This try and buy thing only quick commerce can offer, because just logistically speaking, today the return experience of a national player like a Myntra or an Ajio is hard, right? I mean, you get an order in 4-5 days, then you try it out, then you book a return, etc. You do all of that, right? Whereas here you're getting the order in 15 minutes or in half an hour, you're trying in 15 minutes and you're returning. For the platform, from a logistics cost perspective also, the full cost of a return for a Myntra is, I don't know, 180, 190 rupees. But for a quick commerce platform, the full cost of return will still be 70, 80 rupees at scale, So the model the hyper-local model sort of allows that. So this is one example of why quick commerce can reimagine fashion. And then there are similar examples for home services, similar for pharmacy. So I think when you're looking at some of these categories, the framework is to say, can this model reimagine the category rather than just saying, ki main 1 ghante mein pahuncha?
Least I have seen this data, like for example, you shed light on that, okay, possibly 15 minutes is the cutoff after which retention falls off. I think I have read about this data that, in fashion specifically, selection matters. Right, you can't be saying that okay, these limited amount of SKUs contribute 20%, and also if that's also true, by the way, innerwear or some of those categories, why won't existing horizontal QC players do? They will also do. Right. So whichever is very, very predictable is the need of the hour, needs in 15 minutes. I think mera sense hai that to horizontal QC players will also do. Now the question is, and we see this data at GoKwik, that in fashion, by the nature of it, that demand is very, very long tail, fluctuates a lot. And hence, we've tried our hand at predicting that demand, but at least, and then, on top of it, you put a hyper local filter on top of it. It becomes very, very hard. I think what Zara or, Shein did in terms of predicting demand and then manufacturing it, it still is a 45-60 day cycle, which they do. Doing that on a real-time basis, at least I find it very, very fascinating that, how to do it. And also when it comes down to branded play, right? Fashion starts to become branded play. मेरा थोड़ा सा उसमें I think a little bit of a different viewpoint है. I think that That does not require convenience. That requires a consumer to opt into the brand, opt into the style, and then get into the convenience cycle. Right? आप 15 मिनट बोलोगे मैं लेऊंगा for example, but getting into the brand, buying into the brand, and then predicting styles, etc. At least I have spoken to a few data scientists, etc. It looks like a very hard problem. I don't know if it is impossible, but I think that's where you are saying that's where VCs want to take the bet that possibly that's very
Chirag,
very large
basically,
outcome.
what I'm saying is that so we are still trying to solve the problem of predicting demand and predicting trends from a marketplace perspective. Not doing our own private label and sorting out manufacturing. Like, this is not going to be a Shein where you own everything end to end, that you are the front end, you are the middle end, and you are the back end, basically, right? Let's say one dark store carries 10,000, and 10,000 is just a placeholder today, right? Can be 15,000 tomorrow, 20,000 tomorrow. Like, I think the market will evolve and we'll see. And some of this is just hypothesis. We'll see how it sort of pans out the way it pans out. But on average, if you have 10,000 SKUs on a dark store, across all your dark stores, you'll probably have 25,000 SKUs, because some SKUs will be different location wise. For an average user, right, if I want to go and buy a shirt, kitni shirt dekhni hai mere ko? 100, 150, 200? Is 200 enough depth for me, enough catalog depth for me? Probably yes, right? Even if you take 200 ka number, basically, and if you have 25, 30,000 SKUs on the platform, you can have 150 product categories with that kind of depth actually on the platform. So it's not like, what is the definition of long tail? Long tail doesn't mean that we need 100,000 SKUs, because nobody really goes beyond the first 20 scrolls, right? The 20 or 21st scroll, right? I think the challenge or the opportunity for founders here is less about saying, can you actually keep a large assortment, but about saying, can you actually predict the trends accurately? And can you take advantage of that data set? How it pans out, we'll see, but that is the play.
I think on larger fashion, I have a huge, and maybe Chirag knows this better than anyone else, but return propensity for the Indian consumer across fashion categories is very high. We are seeing it play out in Meesho. Anand spoke about how much it happened in Myntra. I think if you are getting something in 15 minutes, you are going to see people en masse buy 10 things and return 9, right? It's going to happen.
I want to tell you some early data once you finish, but I want to tell you some early.
Also, like thinner margins, larger assortment, depth requirements. You're right. I don't think the depth requirement will be that much of an issue. But I think the way that model works is different. So, if you can get that right, like undergarments, let's say round neck polos, whatever, like 3, 4, 5 sharp categories, I think usme PMF aa sakta hai, where you will kind of see a good margin building process. But beyond that, at scale, thoda, I find it
Shantanu,
a struggle.
अपन वही बोल रहे थे ना कि I think what stops the horizontal players from doing it, because they would also want to do it. So what is the need for a specific vertical player to come in? But I'll also, from a buying behavior point of view, give you one data point which we have seen. In beauty and personal care, online shopping mein, typically a consumer would have to engage 2 to 4 times to buy. In innerwear or some of those categories, women innerwear, the typical interaction is 10 to 12 times. In fashion, long tail fashion, that number becomes 24 times.
Oh,
So you have to engage the user 24. So that's how discretionary the purchase is, right? You want to try, you want to like see the color, etc. And on top of it, then there are 10-15% returns.
So one thing that I want to clarify here, I think when we talk about fashion, within fashion, the essentials, which is your undergarments or innerwear, or even standard items like a black t-shirt or a white t-shirt, all of that plays horizontal play. So horizontals are going to do that basically, right? And I think all the fashion companies, which are, all the fashion quick commerce companies that are coming up, they're focusing on fashion. They're focusing on jeans, they're focusing on women wear, they're focusing on all of those things. Largely focused on, Gen Z millennials today, but hopefully it'll expand, it'll sort of increase in terms of assortments. But Shantanu, you remember I mentioned to you about the point about Stitch Fix. Stitch Fix would have thought ki yaar, if we send 5, somebody wants to buy 1, they'll keep 1, they'll return 4. But they ended up seeing something opposite. They ended up seeing 3.2. Today, early data, but try and buy is the most prevalent reason for why people order from quick commerce. It's less about getting it in 1 hour. It's more about I should be able to try and just return, just on the spot. The return rate on average in the industry is 9%. Even then, all players combined. I've seen data of every single player in every single geography. Its average is 9%. It varies from 8% to 10.5%, basically, across categories, right? So there is something different here. And I'll tell you anecdotally what is different here. Okay? and we know Myntra, Meesho, etc. The Agio average return rate is 30 to 40%. I mean, typically क्या होता है कि, I mean, this is again just buying behavior of the user. You know, when people are browsing and when people make an impulse purchase, if the order gets delivered in 4 or 5 days, by that time they would have found a better style. Buyer's remorse sets in. You know, why did I order this? You know, etc. etc. All of that happens basically, and half the time you think, you know, when the item comes in, if it is not really great, you know, it's not really looking great on you, you say कि return कर देते हैं, फिर आगे देखेंगे, right? Whereas when you actually order on a quick commerce, then you get the item in next 30 minutes. Today, the average delivery time is broadly 45 minutes, but with densification, it'll come down to 30 minutes. It's naturally come down to 30 minutes. It'll be good for the business from a unit economics perspective. You get the item in 30 minutes. You've not had chance to look at other styles. You don't have a buyer's remorse. You are still in that elevated state of, you know, instant gratification. You try the item, you like it, you keep it. And that is showing...
You're almost saying, and that's exactly the statistic argument also is that you are finding ways to push the consumption envelope. It's not share of wallet, it's almost wallet size in that moment.
In some ways, yes.
Well, I agree with this. Yeah, the data corresponds to Chirag. You would also have similar data, right? Faster the delivery, lower the RTO.
Yes. That's
same ही हो गया ना, basically remorse set in नहीं हो रहा है, mind change नहीं हो रहा है. All of these things, so we've seen even in normal D2C, right? So this seems like a very, very different outcome that people would not have maybe. I mean, अब data के साथ obviously it's very clear हाँ ये हो सकता है करके, but this is phenomenal to see, right? That you're just getting faster delivery, is lesser cancellations, lesser RTO, lesser. I think RTO भी कम होगा, right? Acceptance कि यार हाँ मेरे को नहीं चाहिए क्योंकि मेरा mind change हो गया, is a very big problem in if you're delivering in a long duration of time, right? तो वो पहले कम होगा, returns कम होगा, net the cost of deliveries will go up, but the GMV to NMV gap itself is the biggest benefit, is what you're saying, Rahul, here.
No, cost of delivery, I think that point got missed, right? Today, a Myntra has 70 rupees of forward logistics cost and roughly 110 rupees of reverse logistics cost. So on an order that goes and comes back, the total cost is about 180, 190 rupees, right? That is the total cost on an order.
ज़्यादा होगा ना?
मैं उस पे भी आऊँगा. नहीं, I'll come there, right? In a quick commerce model today, you know, or at relatively decent scale, you don't need to reach $5 billion of scale, but let's say a $200-300 million of scale in terms of GMV, your blended cost of an order that goes and comes back also, because the same delivery boy who's waiting and coming back, it's going to be 80-90 rupees. And once you sort of scale to $1 billion, $2 billion kind of a thing, where the densification of orders have happened, it'll come down to about 60 odd rupees, 60-70. So it's a sea of difference between that. The AOV on quick commerce today is higher than Myntra, actually. So Myntra hasn't, my sense is from what I've heard from people, Myntra has an AOV of 1300, 1400, 1450, something like that. I'm not sure. It's what I've heard from people. On quick commerce, it's 1500 plus.
Very interesting, yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, उस AOV पे तो बहुत ही beautiful economics हो जाएंगे फिर अगर तो 100 रुपए delivery cost बोल रहे हैं.
The average selling price of an item on quick commerce is roughly, on fashion quick commerce, is around 850-900 rupees. People end up buying, you know, anywhere between 1.8 to 2.2 items because of this whole quick delivery and instant gratification thing.
And the trial room concept.
Wow.
Yeah, trial room concept, correct.
I think what, at least fundamentally, you know, I also like to see quick commerce as that what is intent traffic. यार मुझे grocery खरीदना है, मुझे maid चाहिए. Whereas fashion, you know, if I look at any fashion website today, 80% of traffic is coming from Instagram. Right. So maybe Rahul, I think somebody, you know, in fashion quick commerce to really work, I think we have to solve the discovery problem also. Right. That's
It's so
possibly
counter, yeah.
the big piece of the puzzle. क्योंकि यार मैं ऐसे नहीं खरीदता, I don't need, but
you
then
are
I'm
right.
scrolling.
And it's great that you brought this point, because actually some of the players that we've met, the user acquisition funnel that they've built, they've said, you know, we highlight our designs through our reel channel. I mean, they'll have a channel on the reel where there's going to be a stylized design, and AI can really help you create those, reels and make very effective copies, you know, which market really well. Then you use that. So there you have sort of created, you have helped people discover, but you've also created inspiration or aspiration for that design. Now, how do you take that aspiration to a purchase and delivery in 1 hour so that you keep that aspiration and keep that instant gratification alive? So the funnel actually does start from there. And when it starts from there, then the 1 hour delivery makes a lot of difference, because then, you know, the user is still in that elevated state of inspiration that, oh, this will look fantastic on me. I want this dress.
that is very actually, the balance then becomes very important, because you're saying that the discovery is almost a critical part. It happens through social, visual appeal in a way, but curation and assortment also has to be tight, because you don't want a lot of depth. So
Yeah.
you have to make sure that because these two forces are kind of not opposite, but in different directions.
Yeah.
So that balance is very critical.
If you ask me, honestly, a lot of people think that logistics is going to be a challenge, try and buy, in a try and buy proposition. In my mind, anybody who can solve for curation will win in this market.
Correct. You are absolutely right. And I think in
Yeah.
AI world, all of these signals or agentic workflows talking could make it possible. Wherein we know, okay, Shantanu is flying out tonight, is going to this city, weather is this, and then can I predict that, okay, he'll like this. So those personalized AI
Yeah.
stylists might be the first block to solve. I think you're also saying the remaining will get solved. I
Yeah,
think
yeah.
that's like cherry on the top.
Yeah.
Super experience, you will get better
Yeah.
economics, lower returns, all of that will possible.
Correct. And also,
Interesting.
if you think of fashion from the next 10 years perspective, your Gen Zs are going to be your main customers over the next 10 years, right? They have attention deficit. They want something that's very personal to them or that resonates with them, that speaks with them. They don't have time, right? They're buying on the go. They're digitally native. So I think, if somebody combines this whole, social media, AI curation, and then this whole buying experience of delivery and try and buy all of it, I think it sort of comes together very well for this next generation of customer base.
Very interesting. Actually, I had a question more on the. I know we touched upon it a couple of times. I think Revant is in the business deeply on pharmacy. I heard that now one of the large quick commerce players is actually piloting pharmacy in 30 minutes. There's a call center of doctors, MBBS graduates who have not gone on. Like 75% of MBBS graduates don't go on to do their masters, by the way. So at a fairly reasonable per month cost, there's a cost center, and then I think a lot of the regulatory stuff gets done, because frankly, Revant is right. Consumers are like, boss, a lot of households have now lesser number of people per household. So if one person is unwell, the other person going out, etc., becomes difficult. So get onto a 3, 4, 5 minute video call and quick prescription and delivery in 30 minutes kind of a thing is getting done. So I'm not sure, maybe because frankly, if you ask me, it's very valuable to me as a consumer, because for me, a lot of my dosages, especially the flu, etc., are kind of the same, but I need prescriptions for it. So
Yeah, no, I agree. Look, I think our understanding of the penetration of pharmacies is probably very different from how rest of the India sees it. And I'll tell you why. Because, pharmacy is an industry where there is usually a lot of concentration in certain clusters, and then there is nothing available for miles and miles and miles, right? And that is probably true with the entire healthcare system in India. The healthcare penetration in India is still very, very low, right? And also the most important aspect, which is the fill rate of your prescription. While the fill rate at a cluster level between, let's say, 10 pharmacies in a 6-7 kilometer radius will be high, the fill rate at a pharmacy level could be low. That you go to this X pharmacy, uske paas 10 में से सही दवाई है या 7 ही दवाई है, basically, right? So in pharmacy, there is a strong case for a quick commerce. अब वो horizontal solve करेगा कि vertical solve करेगा, time will tell. Horizontal players are definitely trying it out. But there is a strong case for quick commerce to A, solve for speed, B, solve for reliability, and 3, solve for, this fill rate, basically, right? So can you deliver it very quickly? Can you keep a large assortment and have a very high fill rate? Can I sort of rely on you? I mean, can you be my go-to thing? And I think this whole process of, prescription and getting it from a doctor, etc. Yeah, this can be solved. This is a very tactical thing. This is a very easy thing to solve. It's not that big,
My question was a little different then. Why is, I think before pharmacy, and मेरे को लगता है थोड़ा सा ना एक bias इसमें ये आ जाता है कि कौन से vertical marketplace चले हैं. Now, people will say that a 1mg or a pharmacy, while they did okay, the venture outcome wasn't that great. But if I see a Nykaa, if I see a Myntra, if I see a First Cry, great venture outcomes. And it almost seems like force fitting कि यार इनके 2.2 versions जो 30 minutes में होंगे वो है. Like fashion, I take your point. But why is baby care in 30 minutes getting so much? Like diaper is a loss-making proposition. And First Cry is 60-65% fashion again. Is it just saying baby fashion will become a separate vertical?
मुझे तो इनफैक्ट ऐसा लगता है, so we discussed this point and what I was trying to sort of explain earlier also, and I'll repeat the same thing. मुझे ऐसा लगता है कि while everybody will try and find quick commerce of X in a way, right, here and there, but eventually the right framework to look at it is quick commerce as a model bringing or elevating the category experience by 4-5x, right? Is it elevating the the unit economics? Is it elevating the customer buying behavior? Is it elevating the average order value in the basket share, etc.? If it is doing that, then there is a fit. If it's not doing that, then it's not a fit. In fact, to your point about diapers and everything, मुझे लगता है when we talk about pharmacies, it's not going to be pharmacy just selling drugs and selling medicines. It's going to be a pharmacy and wellness together. You can get diapers over there. You can get energy drinks over there. You can get, I don't know, maybe your protein shakes over there. Like, why not? If today the physical pharmacy is constrained by the amount of items it can keep, right? If in fact the front of the item is all wellness product, the medicines are actually kept at the back. Medicines are not kept in the front. But if the space was not and because it's a retail front, there is a certain cost associated with it. But if it's a dark store, and the the throughput of a medicine dark store is the highest amongst all kinds of categories, I can keep all wellness items.
You think the health and wellness marketplace that didn't happen in 1.0 verticalization may happen in e-commerce 4.0 or now what we call verticalization 2.0. Interesting point. But any view on the baby side, First Cry 2.0? 30 minutes? Is that something that you would get excited to look at? Ki yaar, yahan pe disruption ho sakta hai. Like you have children, right? So you've seen
I'm always hear interesting founders because we learn through the eyes of founders. Yeah, it's the founders who tell us what can be built, to be honest. So we're honestly a viewer. I don't go with a predetermined mindset.
No, what I mean is a lot of our viewers now, some of them are VCs, some of them are founders, a lot of them are operators who wish to become founders sometime. So after a long while, there is so much excitement around a consumer tech industry that people are like, हाँ यार यहाँ कुछ बनाना चाहिए. वरना पिछले 2 साल तो सबको सिर्फ ब्रांड बनाना था, right? And we were wondering कि भाई ऐसा क्या हो गया करके. But I think थोड़ा सा sentiment also evolves around कि यार there is something exciting now happening. Like in SF and Valley, it's AI, right? It's AI a little bit here as well, but there it's just on a different level excitement कि यार सब AI बनाएंगे करके. यहाँ पे अभी भी थोड़ा सा हम रोटी कपड़ा मकान thought process में है अभी भी. It's fine, right? The country has to evolve to what the future would look like. And you're saying Gen Z, Gen Alpha would love fast fashion. Maybe when they have kids, they want कि यार 10 मिनट में आ जाना चाहिए सब कुछ करके. Or when they want medicine, everything should be in 10 minutes. So what else could be reimagined? Like somebody was discussing a Lenskart 2.0 saying chashme in 30 minutes. I'm like, भाई ये कैसे होगा करके? They're like, घर पे आके कोई ये ले लेगा तुम्हारा. And it makes sense because the AOV there actually allows you to send someone home. Like phlebotomists started coming home for doing blood tests. Why can't an eye test be done at home and then you do the style selection? You have an...
So it'll become part of pharmacy and wellness, in my mind. You add services to pharmacy and wellness, which could be your eye test, which could be your blood test. But if you look at the
size of Lenskart, one could argue that there could be a standalone Lenskart 2.0 in 1 hour, 2 hours also. Like Chirag specs, like all of our 3 of us are wearing specs, right? And I know we now have a little bit money, so we will spend. But average 5,000 के नीचे कोई नहीं spend करता है ढंग के specs और उसके लिए. And that AOV and massive gross margin, you don't know. I mean, मैं तो उल्टा सोच रहा हूँ. मैं भी बोल रहा हूँ यार excite होते हैं ना. Let's see. Like I have been pushing people to do D2C logistics, for example, in 1 hour. I am also thinking what else can happen in 30 minutes, 60 minutes. Like I keep pushing.
So again, one framework, Revant, one framework there, which is we started the discussion by saying that the highest fit is towards low AOV, high frequency businesses. Now, low AOV will eventually increase, right? Because, the basket size and the basket share, all of that will improve. But high frequency as a use case will still remain a very key proponent of saying why quick commerce works here and why it doesn't work here. If there is an item that I'm going to purchase twice a year or once a year, doesn't really matter whether you deliver it to me in 1 hour or what. Like, the business model doesn't work there.
Yeah. No, my view is, again, like beginning of the year, I told my team that let's go all in on the quick delivery as a D2C player, right? Because 55-60% of our India business is still D2C, which is very large portion. And health and wellness, I believe, is while subscriptions haven't worked out in India, broadly, I think health and wellness will remain D2C first because it's also a hard fact market. And again, there's authenticity, trust. We are building the market and stuff like that. We had Samir on the podcast last week. Again, he said, right, D2C friendly hai unka bhi business. I think health and wellness will also end up being a high frequency use case when the market evolves to that situation. It becomes very regular consumption. Aaj protein wahan pahuncha hai for, let's say, power users, but more and more vitamin, mineral supplements, all of these will also get there. So at least we are all in on the faster delivery, but we don't have enough logistics players, for example, putting up dark stores at the pace that we would need them to, right? So that we can cover the top 1,000 pin codes where I have, let's say, 50% of my business. Even there, I'm not able to do a 2-hour delivery because the infrastructure doesn't exist. From a venture point of view, would you Like, would you think that a delivery or a e-com express 2.0 should exist, which will enable a 30-minute delivery for anyone who wants to use that infra? Like, e-commerce got built on a delivery, a e-com express, a Blue Dart, a DHL, and so on and so forth. Shouldn't e-commerce 4.0, like, everybody doesn't need to put their own dark stores. Why can't there be a common dark store infrastructure provider who will say that, boss, I will have a 2 kilometer density, और इसमें आप कपड़े बेच रहे हो, आप प्रोटीन बेच रहे हो, आप ये बेच रहे हो, भाई, I am your infra guy. Isn't that model like worth looking at from a venture perspective?
Yeah, no, that's a very interesting question. I mean, first of all, I want to say that to your original point of saying, is there a need for a health and wellness platform, that can deliver very quickly, and can you use this as a wedge? I think absolutely yes. I don't think we have a holistic health and wellness platform in India, to be honest. Like, we don't have an iHub equivalent in India. And whether that platform comes from a brand or whether that platform starts as a marketplace and starts launching private label, I don't know which way it will work out, but there is definitely a massive use case, particularly after the inflection point in people's thought process post-COVID towards health and wellness. There's definitely a case to be made for a wellness marketplace through a quick commerce model, because there's frequency of purchase, there's very, very high repeat and all of that. To your question about delivery, I have an unpopular opinion over there, actually, that most people sort of don't agree with, right? Before getting into the tactical discussion of what works, what doesn't work, I have a very high-level philosophical disconnect over there, right? Which is to say that when e-commerce 1.0 happened, or when e-commerce 2.0 happened, after gross margin or gross profit, their biggest line item was delivery cost. And therefore, businesses were built on that line item. In quick commerce, the smallest line item is delivery cost. So how do you go and build a business on it?
Let me give you a reverse view. Maybe you're looking at marketplaces, and maybe I'm coming from a D2C brand perspective. But Shantanu, I don't know what it is for you, but logistics plus warehousing, and I have checked with a lot of brands, it's between 6% to 10% for most D2C brands. So if you're very high AOV,
Yes,
it will be
5 to
5-6%. Right? अगर आप high AOV हो तो low AOV हो आप, and high frequency will be a little lower AOV, will be close to 10% also, warehousing plus logistics. Now 10% of a 1,000 rupee order is 100 rupees per order. I think that's sizable enough for a business to exist.
I'll explain.
नहीं क्या?
No, I'll
Like
explain.
delivery का per
नहीं, मैं बता दो,
per
थोड़ा सा
order revenue कितना होगा? Let's take a e-commerce example. If I'm using delivery for a 2-day delivery across, let's say, shipping from Bombay to Bilaspur, okay? I think the
दिल्ली का डिलीवरी का क्या बोलते हैं पर ऑर्डर रेवेन्यू इज, आई थिंक आई हैड दैट नंबर समवेयर, कांट फाइंड इट.
can't be more than $100. हाँ, मैं वही बोल रहा हूँ. तो but अगर
यार उनका एक्सप्रेस पार्सल का रेवेन्यू 600 मिलियन है, उनके एक्सप्रेस पार्सल कितने, आई एम फॉरगेटिंग द नंबर्स, राइट? नहीं, बट मैं टाइम की बात कर रहा हूँ, मैं एवरेज ऑर्डर वैल्यू की बात नहीं कर रहा हूँ. एंड I'll explain what I mean actually.
Sorry, so I had both the points. So one is, I think the average order value first for warehousing plus logistics is enough. And by the way, the economics are same. Okay, so I work with now 2-3 guys, and I really want to like invest, and I think the next 1,000 crore player in warehousing plus logistics will be someone who enables 1,000 crore revenue. Okay, because the economics are same. जैसे डार्क स्टोर में 1,000 ऑर्डर लगते हैं फॉर लेट्स से अ क्विककॉम टू ब्रेक इवन, एंड ब्लिंकिट एंड इंस्टामार्ट फॉर पब्लिक हैव सेड दिस, राइट? दिस इज आवर थ्रेशोल्ड. 1,000-1,200 पे वी स्टार्ट ब्रेकिंग इवन, एंड देन 2,000 पे इतना कंट्रीब्यूशन मार्जिन बनेगा. इट्स रियली सेम फॉर अ लॉजिस्टिक्स प्लस वेयरहाउसिंग प्लेयर. एंड द रीजन आई एम यूजिंग द वर्ड वेयरहाउसिंग इज बिकॉज टेक्निकली डार्क स्टोर इज ऑल्सो वेयरहाउस. इट्स लाइक अ मिनी वेयरहाउस, राइट? तो उसमें भी वही हो रहा है. 1,000 ऑर्डर पे दे ब्रेक इवन, एंड देन इट्स ऑल मक्खन. And you don't need 500 clients compared to a delivery who needed long tail also. And of course, the top 20 clients give 80% of business. यहाँ भी ऐसे ही होगा. It's very similar that if you work with a Purple or a Nykaa who don't have their own warehouses, and the top 100 D2C brands will give volume, like a health card, for example, which is heavy on D2C, fundamentally you're able to actually fill the dark store and break even very quickly, and therefore setting the infra is, and TAM का issue नहीं है, because चिराग तू टाइम बता देना, D2C टाइम चिराग बताएगा.
I was actually coming to, maybe Rahul was alluding to the TAM question more than the line item. कि Rahul, आपका question more around TAM है क्या? कि, okay, if there is a player who starts to come in and enable D2C brands, and then, okay, is the size of price going to be enough? Are there
That's
going to
his
be enough
question.
shipments?
So I'll actually layer the thought process a little bit over there, right? So at the end of the day, whatever consumer brands are producing, that is eventually getting sold in the market. Either it's going D2C or it's going through marketplaces, correct? right? In the e-commerce 1.0 world, where most of the stuff was being sold from the marketplace, all of that TAM was basically available for logistics players. Today, what is happening is all of the quick commerce platforms will have their own in-house logistics, because it just reduces the cost of delivery to about 30 to 35 rupees for them, basically. So then the market that is available for you is the D2C market. That's available for you. Now within D2C market, what is happening is that you have three kinds of brands. You have brands which are where the AOV could be less than 500 rupees. Then there are brands where AOVs are 500 to, let's say, 1200, 1500 rupees. And then there are 1500 rupee plus. Now, for anybody, for a brand that is where AOV is less than 500 rupees, for them using any of these logistics players for same day or 2 hour delivery is not cost effective at all, basically, right? So most of the time they're actually playing with people, or they're sort of servicing people where the average order value is broadly 800 to 1000 rupees, right? Now there, what happens is that initially the model starts as a transfer pricing model, which is to say that I am going to charge you X amount for the delivery cost, and I have this, and then I'll sweat my own assets and I'll sort of make a margin in between. But when the brand becomes big, and I know this because I've spoken with some of, like, almost every player, which is there in this space, when you become like a Nykaa or a Lenskart, you say, boss, I want my dedicated warehouse, my dedicated dark store. So at that point, you're not a logistics service provider, you become a warehouse management company, where the model changes from having transfer pricing and therefore having high contribution margin to saying cost plus. If you actually look at delivery today, deliveries, contribution margin is roughly 13%. And then they make an EBITDA of 1.7%, basically, right? If you're in a cost plus model, nobody will give you 13%. So
Rahul, are you saying, I'll give you some numbers. Are you saying the concentration of D2C market is heavily skewed toward enterprise, which is the large customers who's going to have
scale, correct?
Scale, right? At least I can tell you data wherein it's actually not that skewed, wherein only 20% of, or going back to the Pareto, which Shantanu said, 20% of customers are actually not contributing to 80% of GMV. In our case, it's actually very long tail. 60% of the merchant base is actually very, very, very long tail. So all of those, by the way, let's go by that logic. Shiprocket exists because the nature of the market is long tail. Right. Otherwise, there is no need for a Shiprocket to exist, right? Just for, and they do, by the way, 1,500 crores of revenue today. So it's sizable. If we break the market from that point of view, I think it looks like that there should be a player which should exist and should be serving non-enterprise D2C, which is a sizable enough market. And just for numbers, I think we are looking at the market D2C as $8 to $10 million. I hardly see, by the way, only 2-3% of merchants are below 500. You are right that average order value in the segment is close to 1,200-1,300 rupees. Bulk of it is centered around this.
Actually, Rahul, हमारा ना normal delivery में भी 700-800 के नीचे पैसा ही नहीं बनता है. Economics ही don't work. D2C as a market, it has now moved. The US में भी हुआ है, right? Actually, and it's not delivery cost. What has happened is the marketing costs are so high.
CAC ज़्यादा है.
CAC इतना ज़्यादा है ना कि आप 600-800 के नीचे बेच ही नहीं पाते हो आप.
Correct.
Most of categories get 500 rupee CAC. 400, 450.
और मैं बता रहा हूँ राहुल, इसके लिए मेरा व्यू ये है कि already and I think what most people underestimate is the D2C TAM. Like what Chirag said, right? कि Shiprocket अगर 1500 crore का revenue है purely on long tail. Like for example, we used to use Shiprocket when we started, when we were very small, but then I got direct rates with delivery. So I moved out. I became an enterprise technically, though we are not an enterprise like Nykaa or Purple. We are much smaller. But from that parlance, we are not long tail. Right? There's long tail, there's SMB, and there's enterprise D2C. So people like us and Healthcart, for example, come in enterprise D2C. Anybody at 400, 500 crore annual GMV is an enterprise D2C player. Right? I will never set up my own warehouses. Purple may, because these are $1 billion GMV. Right? But वो भी नहीं कर रहा है. By the way, I don't know if you're aware, Nykaa doesn't have its own warehouses. Nykaa uses Emiza. It's an outsourced warehouse provider. So I actually differ here. Ki up to 1,000 crore GMV players, and there will exist 20 of those, they will not put up their own infra. Because
no, that's not what I'm saying, that they'll put up their own infra. Sorry, what I was saying was that they're asking...
No, we can't move to cost plus, sorry. I'll tell you what will happen in my view. Because आज क्या होता है? आज delivery, Blue Dart, and let's say now e-com express is folded into there's Express Bees. Let's say like there are 3-4 players. They compete for my business, and I will always say that nahi, meko ye rate de rahe, tu wo rate de. So their ability to ask me, make more money out of me will come down. But it would be surprising for you to know that Emisa, which is a large warehouse provider, is a 15% EBITDA business, even while serving Nykaa, which is their biggest client. तो एक चीज है जो कोई नहीं समझ पाता है इंडिया में कि मैन्युफैक्चरिंग और स्वेटिंग एन एसेट की जो कैपेबिलिटी आती है जो किसी को पता ही नहीं है. लाइक फॉर एग्जांपल है आफ्टर 1000 ऑर्डर ब्रेक इवन होता है, बट 2000 ऑर्डर पे डार्क स्टोर्स विल मेक लाइक 20% कंट्रीब्यूशन, और मुझे पता ही नहीं लगेगा वो, बिकॉज दैट ओनली द गाय विल नो. लाइक हमारे साथ तो हमेशा सब रोएंगे, अरे नहीं कॉस्ट बढ़ गया है, पेट्रोल बढ़ गया है, भाव बढ़ाओ करके, राइट. लाइक मैन्युफैक्चरर्स इन इंडिया आर द मोस्ट सॉलिड लालास बिकॉज दे आर लाइक, अरे नहीं मैन पावर कॉस्ट बढ़ गया है, नहीं कन्वर्जन कॉस्ट बढ़ाओ. But if you open their books, it will be fucking 20% EBITDA business.
So Revant, look, you may actually be right from a TAM perspective. I don't know. I mean, there are more complications and I'll come to that. But actually from a cost perspective, operational leverage बहुत कम है इस business के अंदर. Dark store की rental cost बहुत कम होती है. जो variable cost होती है ना delivery करने की, rider की, वो actually सबसे ज़्यादा होती है इन platforms के लिए. तो ऐसा नहीं है, अगर वो 1000 ऑर्डर पे break even करेगा तो ऐसा नहीं है कि 2000 ऑर्डर पे massive operational leverage will kick in. But the other point is also this.
Can I interrupt there? तू जो डेंसिटी का बेनिफिट बोल रहा है जो क्विक.कॉम मार्केट प्लेसेस को आएगा ना, I actually would argue that the same efficiencies would come in if there is a delivery equivalent for 2 hours. By the way, people are doing 2-hour delivery, yeah, not 30 minutes or 1 hour, और वो मिल्क रन कर रहे हैं. यार जब प्रेस्टीज शांति निकेतन में 10 ऑर्डर आएंगे ना, वो एक डिलीवरी बॉय 10 ऑर्डर लेके जाएगा, इतनी मैसिव एफिशिएंसी आ जाएगी ना उसमें. मेरे को लग रहा है डेंसिफिकेशन विल ऑल्सो हैपन इन दिस केस ना. इफ आई हैव द टॉप 200 D2C brands, then Prestige Shanti Niketan में others.
No, I agree. But my point is, they will basically pass on that benefit to the end customer. अगर आज 140 रुपए ले रहा है वो ब्रांड से, तो 140 रुपए पे वो स्केल तो नहीं कर सकता धंधा. कल को 100 रुपए लेना पड़ेगा, 90 रुपए ऑफर करना पड़ेगा. That is what I think basically. तो जैसे
पैसा बनेगा उसका मेरे हिसाब से.
नहीं पैसा बन जाएगा, हो सकता है maybe. See, the other challenge that I faced when I actually spoke to a lot of mid-sized brands, na, they said कि यार for us it is very hard to do demand prediction at a hyper local area and distribute our SKUs across these dark stores.
ये एक दिक्कत, but I think the market is evolving to a level where the next delivery, which will say I will do 2-hour delivery, right? Abhi to they are first covering a city. Now there are players that we are working with who have almost covered one city. Now I am only telling them that why am I operating my mother warehouse with X player? If you are doing all my deliveries in Bangalore through dark stores, you have a mother warehouse. I will keep all my Bangalore requirements with you only. Amazon को भेज देना अगर तो तू ही भेज. So in fact, I think this wedge will be a massive disruption to existing warehousing and logistics players, because I will enter through quick delivery, but then I will end up taking all your regular business also.
So then you are saying that the logistics players should be able to do the demand prediction across hyperlocal areas कि मेरे को कौन से dark stores में क्या रखना है, correct? Now the problem over there is that, you know, when you are running a platform yourself, then the kind of insights that you have on categories is very high because you are a specialized player in that particular category or on those particular categories. For a logistics player who's selling everything from, let's say, you know, a wellness product to, I don't know, a shoe or whatever, I don't know how that demand prediction will work out. But you're right. If somebody is able to actually do that demand prediction and solve for it, probably they can build a very large business. That's probably true.
This could have actually been the Udaan business. Udaan was a brand to retailer business.
Yeah.
It could actually have been a D2C brand plus wholesaler to consumer business with infra as the capex. It could have, because you're basically financing inventory in a way. So even like large scale quick commerce players are also becoming like hub and spoke in a way, right? It's not brand, like almost 30-40% of our POs are now getting filled in like hub places which have still 30 to 45 minutes delivery to either a consumer or they deliver to dark stores, right? It could have been, I think the Udaan opportunity like pivoted could be what Revant is talking about. And frankly, if you were to ask me, we are trying. हमसे होता नहीं है, by the way. We now have a largest D2C business now, just given the assortment change, for it to now matter. It's now almost 20% of our total business. Nowhere close to what Revant size is, but sizable now. It used to be like under 2%. But still, we're trying to figure out, and AOVs are much higher because of electric shavers and trimmers. But 2-hour delivery, 1-hour delivery within Bombay, within Bangalore, 20 people are trying. होता नहीं है. Like it's just not reaching scale for us.
Maybe we'll have to do a part 2 of this. मैं लेके आता हूँ demand prediction कैसे कर सकते हैं.
Actually, that's the other thing that I recommend to people that work with GoKwik, because they have data across all their D2C clients, and their demand predictive engine can actually tell the brand to keep these SKUs in these pin codes so it requires both. It requires a tech layer that and वही दिक्कत actually मेरी आ रही है. I don't think TAM issue है. I think issue ये है कि कोई दोनों tech और ops दोनों solve नहीं कर पा रहा है. But that magical combination is where Rahul, I would say, घुसेड़ दे पैसा, पक्का धंधा बढ़िया बनेगा.
राहुल इट्स द सेम थिंग जो फैशन में हम बोल रहे थे ना.
I'll find a team for you with this. मैं भी ढूंढ रहा हूँ. We almost, me and Chirag almost
हम
got
6 महीने से हम ढूंढ रहे हैं.
नहीं मिला भी था बंदा. We convinced him to resign from his job and do this, and he was like
So
done.
you don't like existing players, is it? Like you are not happy
वो
with
सोच ही
existing
नहीं
players?
रहे यार. They don't think technology and prediction. तू exactly तू जो point बोल रहा है ना, delivery never had to predict. They're like, भाई तेरा warehouse, I'm going to charge you per pallet. तेरे को रखना है रख, pallet का तेरे को खर्चा दे रहा हूँ मैं. ये जो layer तू बोल रहा है ना is a very different consumer tech thought process, which pure ops guys, like that combination is बहुत required in this.
But even when we did the delivery episode, Revant, if you remember, their movement to part load is actually a direction in this is clearly evidence of this trajectory only, no?
In some way ना, I think everybody also has, वो बोलता है ना यार, elephants can't dance. वो situation सबके साथ हो रहा है अभी. Like अभी उसे E-com Express खरीद लिया है. Now the shareholders will say कि भाई तूने इतना पैसा खर्चा है 1,500 crore. Now make this merger work. You can't fight 5 battles. यार हमारे दिक्कत में देख, समीर also said that ना, तेरे पास 3 brand है, तू कैसे time allocate कर रहा है? Right? It becomes harder and harder once you have an existing large business to say कि यार अब ना ये material like why did horizontal commerce Q-Comm happen only, right? Why Amazon is waking up now, Flipkart is waking up now. Like Myntra is saying I'm doing 30 minutes, but the fashion guys are still thinking very differently. और OKR ही अलग हो गया ना कि भाई मेरे को densification करना है versus मेरे को catalog बढ़ा रहा है. Now internally imagine there is a massive team in Myntra saying catalog और बड़ा करो, and there is a team saying नहीं catalog को curate करो. Boss, it's a conflicting OKR, and you will solve for 98% of the business.
And more so, you have built the company on that pillar.
Correct.
Every one of us has learned from Amazon की selection बढ़ाओ. तो अब the
So
entire
culturally-
company, the amount of investment which would have gone into supply chain, people roaming around in Jaipur and figuring out selection.
Correct.
All of that is now you're saying is being questioned, or is still a hypothesis, is not being questioned.
More than that, culturally
तो-
the company becomes like that. ना वैसे ही लोग join करते हैं. It's like जो question standard पूछता है ना कि आप fintech हो, आप tech हो कि financial services हो, आप brand हो कि tech हो करके. The culture of the org becomes a certain way, and suddenly you can't transform that org into a different culture. That takes 5 years. So
Your decision making framework is oriented to your original roots ना basically हर किसी के लिए. So
Correct.
then it's very hard to. And I think a lot of times when people try and innovate from within, they are still trying to adapt to the status quo, and sort of that innovation becomes incremental rather than destroying something old and creating something new.
I liked your words that you used in the beginning, right? Incremental thinking versus really challenging the status quo बहुत hard हो जाता है यार. हमारे लिए हो रहा है. Like I get feedback that even it's been 5-6 years that you were always the guy who would challenge the status quo. Why are you thinking incrementally? And I feel bad कि यार मतलब I was always the guy who would कि नहीं भाई दुनिया जीतते और अलग सोचते हैं. But वो हो ही जाता है यार, because day to day just keeps bearing down on you so much. It's the environment, right? Everybody gets bogged down by the environment that you are in, and you can't suddenly change
Yeah,
the
but Revant,
environment.
but being incremental on a large baseline also is a difficult thing. When you
Yeah.
build a large business, you're
Correct.
protecting something
Yeah,
successful also.
100%.
You can't just keep breaking
100%.
stuff that is like
Yeah.
much larger. You're kind of
I
building up.
remember this.
Yeah, Revant, when you start now, typically founders have disruptive mindset. But when a dhanda reaches a certain scale, they have a preservation mindset. They want to preserve what they've built and they want to sort of keep on building on top, right?
Actually,
So
I still think it's
Rahul, that's the battle which we are actually fighting. Last episode we had discussed, rather should we move to the preservation? हम तो अभी भी disruption mode में हैं.
disruption. No,
Pioneer
People are
scale-up-
telling us
No,
get into
I'm saying
preservation
something
mode.
different. Like I have used this example multiple times. I remember when we had to pivot in Rebel to try, when we pivoted technically later, we want to try the multi-brand model, which nobody had built, right? And I still remember arguing with Jaideep saying, I am the CMO of the company. I will continue to do this, but I will also build a new brand. And it was a good decision that I had to step back, because दोनों चीज नहीं होती. एक में तुम incremental सोच रहे हो, एक में तुम कोई blank slate है, right? So Behrouz Biryani would never have come to life if that was not the only thing I was doing. I had to have no baggage, absolute zero thought on यार जो पहले जैसे बनाया था उसको छोड़ दो, भूल जाओ आप. अब अगर नया ब्रांड बनाना है, बिकॉज फासोस तभी वॉज 220 रुपए का, बहरूज को हमें 500-600 रुपए का प्रीमियम ब्रांड बनाना था. फासोस वॉज वैल्यू फॉर मनी. You need to just cut off and change your environment. And that's why entrepreneurs disrupt versus, and technically it was entrepreneurship. I did it within the business. But even their environment change नहीं होता ना, तो वो नहीं बनता वो. Like you need to pull yourself out of this and say कि यार ये अब देखो कोई और, and somebody else took over the CMO position. and it hurts, right? कि यार तुमने इतना बनाया but अब तुम फिर से जाके ground zero पे कुछ कर रहे हो. But that is the only way disruption can happen. This can't happen. And very few people will always say no to a large P&L and say, चलो ठीक है, I will take the harder problem. And बने नहीं बने पता नहीं करके, but let's do this. And that talent, nurturing that talent also in a larger org becomes harder and harder. Like पहले 3 साल में जो गबरू जवान आते हैं सब कि चलो दुनिया जीतते हैं, over time it starts becoming more and more of like now we are all running decently mid-sized companies where the risk is lower for people to join. So it's almost like risk reward framework mein what kind of talent also you have in the org. So too many different things I think are at play here. And I call this broadly as environment. Like how is your environment disruptive enough? Like one could argue, if you look at Meesho, and we've discussed this on a pod, right? How Meesho keeps, and they have a pod structure where, you know, there is a pod where disruption is happening that Vidit may himself run. And there are pods that are looking at BAU, because the kind of innovation that company does at that scale, or I don't know how Dipender does it, but it's possible. But these are very rare cultural orgs that have manifested that environment in some way कि यार हम preservation भी करेंगे but हम disruption भी करेंगे, and maybe this is something to learn from.
I think this is what probably separates great founders from good founders, I guess, over time. So yeah, makes sense.
Thank you for telling us average founders, Rahul.
It
This is
is not
very clear. It's very clear where we lie.
उसने clearly बोल दिया बार ये है तुम यहाँ आओ.
Benny, this is not what I meant. Sorry. This is a general observation.
बढ़िया है,
Super बढ़िया.
guys, बढ़िया है, बढ़िया है,
But
बढ़िया.
Rahul, this is doing such a fast. मैं तो बीच में when you and Revant were jabbing, मैं तो मस्त मूंगफली खा रहा था. I was like, yes, this is great to watch.
No, but this
It
was
was-
great session. I really enjoyed talking to you guys. I think ये 2 घंटे बैठ के बात करने का मौका बहुत कम मिलता है, and I think it also helps us think a lot more. So this was very good. Thank you so much for inviting me.